Are we good? All right. Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. I have my lovely daughter behind the camera, and since we've done a few of these, I know exactly how to answer questions and provide good feedback for you guys as well as everyone online. Today, we're going to talk about block printing, do a little block printing demo. To start off with, I have lots of tools that I like to use that I have had for a long time, but then I have some really great beginner basic tools for you guys starting off to use. First thing we're going to talk about is the fact that we have a couple different things we do here. We're going to carve a block, and then we're going to print. So, and then I have on the table here a bunch of my samples of products that, or things that I've made, just so you can kind of see, because a lot of times we print all these lovely pieces of fabric and then we don't know what to do with them. I actually saw one of my students the other day had made a mask out of one of the pieces that she block printed in my class. I was like, that's awesome. So, first thing we're going to talk about is the carving tools that you need. So, we carry in the shop this little speedball guy, which is a great beginner tool. And in the bottom of it, you get, well, you don't get this many because I've combined two tools because I lost a handle. So you get you get 4 different carving tools and kind of like a straight edge blade. So we're going to carve with that today. And then the product that I like to start beginners on is called Speedy Carve. Looks like this. It comes in a variety of different sizes. Super easy to trim and cut, and it's a great way to get started. And I like this material because it has a little give to it, but it's not so squishy that you can't get some detail out of it. The product that I like to use for a lot of my blocks, like here's my really large Ganesha block that I carved, is this, it's a Japanese vinyl type of substance. It's you can carve on either side. It has black in the middle of it, and it holds detail like traditional linoleum does, but is so much easier to carve than linoleum. I don't know if any of you have ever, back in the day when we had the gray linoleum, and so the best way to use it was actually to heat it with an iron and then carve. I don't know if you guys ever did any carving before. So for the carving, that's all you really need is your carving material and your tool. I like to draw my designs out before I start carving, but you can draw directly on this and just go. I lack in the confidence of doing that, to be perfectly honest. So I am going to do a little drawing. I have to sit to draw. I like to use tracing paper because when you do your design, you want to draw it on here, and then when you transfer it onto your block, it's going to be transferred as the mirror image, right? Which is what you want it to be if you want it to look just like you're drawing. Or if you were doing words, you would write your words out, and then you'd transfer them onto your block upside down so that when you print it, it says the right thing, and it doesn't look like you're in the mirror. So I am going to do just a simple little square. So I think this guy is like 2.5. So I'll just do a 2.5-inch square. And as I start carving, if you guys who are around want to kind of come by and kind of see, please feel free. And I'll hold this up as I move along so it's easier to see. All right, so a lot of times, some of the best blocks I've ever done are the easiest to carve. Like this one, this little guy, so simple to carve, right? but when you put it together, it makes some of the coolest designs, like when you repeat it. Another little one that's super easy is this little just rectangle with stones carved out of it. Like, well, I call them stones because they're not perfect circles, right? So they're like my rocks. This little one with just simple triangles in a line is another super easy design. So the most important thing is to take away from this is that you can create simple designs, and how you repeat them, layer them, as you'll see some of my pieces are layered. You will see how a lot of simple designs, you start layering them, it becomes more complex and more interesting. This is, again, a super simple design, and all that was drawn on here was a quarter of the block, and then I just repeated it so that it became the big one, and then you'll repeat this when you print it. Or it could stand alone, but I think the magic is sometimes what happens when things repeat. So I'm going to do a super quick little carving since we are limited on time. So if let's see. Now I have to think on my feet. What should we carve? What should we carve? All right, we'll do something. I'll make this little repeated block. So if I'm going to take and make this into a little repeated block, what's really important for me is that I only have to draw one half of it. And then these sides will connect with each other as we print it. So sorry, sometimes I get concentrating on talk. Hope everyone is doing well out there, enjoying. We're finally getting some nicer weather, as it was super chilly the last couple days, if you guys have been here. All right, so like I said, I'm going to make this super simple. So I did half of a drawing. Now I'm going to, because I want all my graphite to be on the same side, I'm going to fold this way so that when I transfer it onto the block, I'm actually transferring graphite on both sides.
So that's a special pencil you use?
Oh, it's just my favorite. It's just a normal kind of medium weight, not a super hard pencil. I just like this brand because I like the way it fits in my hand, but it's not anything special. It's just well, I guess it could be special since it's my favorite, but not special in the sense that you have to use this pencil to transfer. You use any pencil you want. All right, so I got both that on there. Now I'm going to take graphite side down onto my block. Super simple blocks. You can also literally just rub it with your fingers and it'll transfer. I mean, it's that soft of a material, but it doesn't always transfer as well as I'd like, so I'll just do a quick draw over it. Usually I tape this down. I totally forgot tape. But it makes it easier when you tape it down so that you can also lift up and make sure you've got everything before you take it off. Oh, and I just ripped it. See, if you get too excited, you rip your drawing. All right, so it's been transferred. Pretty easy transfer over there. I'm going to square this up a little bit, make sure that I all right. Now we're going to carve. So these tools that I have right here are some of these tools I've had since college, which was, I graduated in 97, so that tells you how old some of them are. And they're a Japanese brand, and part of the reason I like them is that, one, they obviously last forever, 20-some years, and I carve quite a bit, is that they'll come apart and your blade can come out, and you also can get this blade sharpened. It's really rare to need it sharpened unless it's used a ton. When I teach my in-house block printing classes, I let my students use these because I really like you to get an understanding of what the different sizes that they come in. These have very limited sizes. They'll do everything that you need, but if you want to really expand and develop more and create more in-depth things, sometimes you need a wider variety of tools. So tools really, they come in two shapes, a V and a U, literally. So here's our V gauge, and I'll pass this around. Livy, I'll put one on the ground, Liv, that you can look at. And then this is the largest tool I have, and this is a U gauge, and you'll see then what a U gauge looks like. So that's a U gauge, Liv. I'm going to put that one down right there. They do make these tools bigger than a size 6. I have no need for that. I don't cut much larger. And then here's a V, Livy. That's what a V looks like. The larger blade I really only use for carving out large sections of background. I usually start with a smaller blade and I will go outline everything. So this is a pretty good size one. These guys are pretty easy, but they can be finicky. It's the nicest way to put it. When you put these little guys in here, how it works is you have this little encasement in here. These two, see, this is what always happens. So you have these two parts that then this sits on that round part. This goes over it. And then that is what's in your blade, or in your handle, excuse me. This is the blade. So I'm going to put it back in there. And so, you know, I have some fairly detailed demo videos on our YouTube channel, one carving and one printing. So if you feel like I'm going too fast here, there's always that. And then I'm also offering some online classes. So, all right, here we go. We're going to carve through this. So you don't hold it like you hold a pencil. This is how I hold my pencil, which is weird enough as it is, right? Because I have this little middle finger thing going there. So this is how my pencil's up like this. When you carve, your blade is going to sit in your hand like this, right? Even if I'm using one of these, it's going to sit like that. They make, there's also a brand of blades like this that come with these super long handles, and you cut it to fit your hand. These all seem to fit nicely. My index finger is always on the top there. And when you hold your blade, I'm going to hold it like this so you can see. I normally wouldn't carve like this. My blade sits about that angle. Whoop. See where I'm at as an angle? If you go up too high, you bury your blade. And if you go too low, you won't even carve. So there's this kind of sweet spot in there. I also found that my middle finger is sometimes a guide along here. And I have it on this tracing paper right now because it'll allow me to rotate the block as opposed to rotating me. So always rotate the block, because the last thing we want to do is cut our finger. I'm going to tell you, these may not seem sharp when you go like this, but you get some forward momentum and you'll have stitches. And I know this from experience. So preferably not ever have your finger in front of the blade. So here's what I'm going to do. There are a few times, like when I'm over here on these edges, if I want to make a super clean edge, that I will allow myself to slowly come to my finger and push in it, because this stuff is so squishy. Otherwise, when you go to the edge, it just kind of bounces off, if that makes sense. All right, so any questions so far? Feel free to just shout them out since I'm not looking at anybody. Excellent. Well, that means I'm doing a good job. Unless you have one, Olivia. Do you have one on your Facebook?
No, people just said hi.
Oh, hi. All right, so as you can see, it's kind of like butter. It just cuts lovely. And you can actually do quite a bit. I'm going to try and do this fairly quickly so that we can see the results also. Yeah, so when you are carving, a couple things that I like you to take into consideration is you don't want to go you don't need to go super deep is what I should say. And that being said, if you don't go deep enough, you can print that background stuff and it's called chatter. So sometimes, like if you go to here and look at these birds, see that background little white texture on there? That is chatter, and that's because ink got on some of my background, but I kind of like it. Like for that, it feels like movement. Other times, I don't want chatter, like I didn't want chatter inside here. And the cool thing about it is that depending on whether you want it or not, you can also create a great texture by just the angle that you choose to carve as far as like the direction that you keep carving in. So like on this, if I kept going around and around and around and around on it, I'd have this kind of circly chatter in there. All right, so once I do an outline of my pieces, then I take out my background. And one of the things you want to think about when you're drawing and when you're carving is, what do I want to keep my block, which will then eventually be my ink, and what do I want to have be background, which will be fabric, or it'll be paper, or whatever you're printing on. Maybe it's a t-shirt or something. So you really want to take into consideration what you're carving out and what you're leaving, because once you carve it out, you can't put it back, but you can always carve out more. So sometimes less is better. And then other times, like you may be going along and your blade may slip, and then you're just going to have to incorporate that into your design somehow. I haven't had a bad enough slip that I felt so distressed that I had to start over. Even on this large Ganesha, there was an area that I carved that I wished I wouldn't have, and I was like, well, not going to redo that one, because it took a long time. And now I don't even notice it, so I figure that's good.
So do your blocks last forever? I mean, these blocks that you're carving out?
So the question is whether my blocks last forever. Well, it's fascinating. It depends on the material. This gum is called Gumbon, this funky Japanese vinyl product. I have had some of this for 10 plus years. Still prints beautifully. I don't have any issues. It doesn't stick together. And so this is pretty new to me trying out, and I haven't had a lot of issues with it. I like it. I used to use another product that after a couple years and amount of usage, it just starts breaking down. Like your edges aren't as clean. If they're in the heat and they sit on each other, they stick to each other, But we'll see. I've heard from other block printers that this stuff lasts for a long time and holds its design and its carving really well. Like I said, I just started using this product, so in the past, year. So we'll see how it goes, but I like it. I think it's perfect for beginners.
Someone has a question.
What's the question?
She said, I learned block printing in an art class, so I know the basics. Has Valori considered a more advanced online class, for example, for good tiny details like tiny circles?
I would love, if there is an interest in a more advanced online class, yes, I will totally do one. before in this shop when we've offered them, there hasn't been enough people that have wanted to take it. But, you know, when it's online, the great thing is that you can sit at home and take my class. So, yes, I would love to do. If you're interested in that, you know, pop me an email.
Same question, another question, same
Okay.
person. Has she considered carrying the gum bond and better carving tools in the shop?
Well, the gum bond, the question is whether I would like to carry the gum bond and these nicer tools in the shop. So the place I get these from is called McLean's Printmaking Supply in Portland. And they are literally the only place in the U.S. that I can find this Japanese product. I think that they have a relationship with them, and that's why they get it. I feasibly can get some in, but the thing is that's really hard is I wouldn't be able to sell it like Speedball. I can have a wholesale account. I'm not sure I have enough demand for me to have these tools cost like between $35 and $40 a tool, up to like the really small ones, the size 1. And they're itty bitty, but they're my favorite. They're like $55 a tool. Now, granted, like I said, I've had this for 20 plus years. So when you think about that, if it's something you're really into, dive into it. So I send my friends and anybody who wants to dive that deeper in to the awesome people at McLean's. They've been around. I got my tools from them in college. They've been around forever. They're only an online catalog shop. And they have great material. When they have it in stock, you can get it. It's kind of hard to find these days, though. Some of the product is harder to get. And I don't mind supporting other businesses that, you know, cater to a craft that we kind of dabble in, because everything they do is printmaking. So
She says thank you.
you're welcome. All right, we're getting close here. So I'm purposefully just trying to keep it a similar shape to my carving out to my design. We'll see if I've carved it enough to get chatter or not get chatter. And I will admit that this is kind of fast and furious carving. I normally am a little bit more precise, and but I don't want to bore you with the carving part, because it can get pretty intense. Some people really love the carving, but then other people are like, I hate carving, but I love printing. I find them both to be really a really fun way to push my creativity, because each one requires different things from me. But then they combine together so beautifully. And I learn about color when I print, and I learn a lot about texture and you know, how much background do I carve out and how much do I leave so it feels balanced. All right. Okay, we're going to keep it this simple. Then I just use an X-Acto knife. Or in the bottom of your Speedball, you do have this kind of funky flat shaped blade, and it'll do the same thing as your X-Acto knife. I just don't know why. I just don't particularly care to use it. All right, here we go. Yeah, so normally I do this on a cutting mat, not on my tracing paper, but all right.
Michelle says no limits to creativity.
That's right, no limits. No limits to creativity. Especially when you can be like, you know, I love the idea that you can take our fabrics and kind of like on this, I made this table runner for my mom, and you can take and enhance it with the block printing, right? And you can take all these different types of prints and ribbons and really step out of your comfort zone. All right, here's our little block. Normally I go wash it off, but I think it's all right. Now, the tools of the trade for the printing aspect. Couple different things here. I have this little couple layers of batting and a scrap cloth on the top. And this is kind of my printing sort of area so that when I am pushing down on this block onto here, I'm going to get a nice transfer with a little oomph. Sometimes I don't have the batting and I just will have lots of layers of fabric, just anything to give you a little something underneath here. I use obviously Speedball block printing, fabric block printing ink. This stuff is awesome. There's not a huge diversity of colors, but you can pretty much mix almost anything you want. We also at the store have this little starter pack that has smaller tubes and it has your primary colors, plus green, black, and white. So this is a great starting off place if you're like, I don't know, but I don't want just black. It's a great way to start. So I'm going to move some of these over. So we have a little space. So you're going to need a roller of whatever size. I try to, my 3 and 4 inch ones are my favorite. I do have one that's a little bit longer. The harder thing about the longer rollers is that they can easily get warped and kind of dented. But they're also very nice. My longer roller, like on my butterfly, will allow me to it's the same width as from the middle of the guy to here that I can ombre each side, So the big rollers are good for covering larger blocks. But if you're sticking to smaller blocks, the 3 and 4 inches is all you really need. And then a spatula to mix your ink. Make sure you don't have any goobers in it. The goobers are not good. And then I use plexiglass, but you can use like a cookie tray or something like that. Just anything that you're going to mix and roll your ink on. So I'm left-handed, so my inking department tends to be on my left side. And I put my block there. I brought some fabric. I obviously brought blue fabric because I really like blue, but we'll try and do something different. So I have this kind of fun, I like printing on textures because I love seeing what happens. I love how the blocks look a little different. So this is an Essex of hand spun, something like that. Anyway, it's kind of a gray color. So let's see. What color should we print on? Anyone have a suggestion? Or what color would you like me to print?
Purple.
Purple, okay. Livy chimes in, she says purple. So block printing ink traditionally is, that you use on paper, is usually mixed with a soy. It's like a soy ink. So that oil, what that does is it allows the printmaker to create a well of ink and roll and cover their block with thin layers of ink multiple times that then, they'll go put into a press and run through a press. What's great about Speedball coming up with this fabric block printing ink is that in 2 days, it'll set on your fabric, clothes included. They are not immune. But it's water soluble. I like to use a little bit of Dawn because Dawn cuts the grease. And this has a little bit of oil in it, which helps us keep a nice wet well and you're not trying to roll dry ink. So let's see what we got here. Sometimes these guys, and this is, see, I always like it when I get the perfect example of what happens to your ink sometimes, and it may throw you for a loop. So there's this oil kind of coming out of this. You can see, I'll hold my, so you see that oil that came out? Normally this is the part that's kind of mixed in here. It will make your ink really transparent. So if you see that coming out, it's not going to hurt it. It just makes it kind of transparent. So I will kind of put that aside and then squeeze some ink out. And here, I'll move that. So make sure there's no goobers. And then I'll make sure it gets all mixed up. And actually that's a pretty bright purple, but we're going to add something to it just so you can see how colors mix. Should we make it a little lighter? Yeah? All right, so there's two different types of white that they make. They make a regular white and they make an opaque white. The opaque white is what I use when I am printing on white on a dark color, like the Ganesha. So when I'm mixing though and I want to make a lighter color, I don't use the opaque because it's too much. So I'll use just the regular white when I mix. And white will work fine on other prints also, but the opaque white really stands out on the dark. Oh, see, there's some more oil. This doesn't happen all the time, but I just don't want all that extra oil in there because it'll make my ink super thin and then it'll be really transparent. So here's our, and I would rather start off with mixing a small amount of ink and then making more than, it's real easy when you're mixing to get a bunch on here and then you have this like mound of like the worst colored pink in the world and you're never going to use it. So start off with a little bit at a time. I'm going to add a little bit of purple so it's just a little bit darker on top of this. All right. Here we go. We'll make sure it's all mixed up. Now, if I really am like not too sure whether this is my color, I'll dab a little bit on my finger and just see what it looks like on the back. And I'll just tap it on there. And then just knowing your ink is going to dry just a smidgen darker than what you see on here. I think that purple's going to be pretty. So it's kind of deceiving because I thought this was going to be a lot lighter. So when you are playing around with colors, just know this ink is sitting on top of the fibers. So it's going to interact differently with colors than it would if it was a dye or a paint that penetrates the fibers. So what I'm doing up here is I'm making what's called a trough.
I have a question.
Oh, Livy, what's your question?
If you mix small amounts of paint, then recreating that same color, excuse me, is iffy, correct, problematic?
Well, it can be if you make some, okay, so the question that Olivia was asking is, that would not her, but someone asked, when I make small amounts and then recreating it, is that kind of iffy to get it exact? It can be, but me personally, I'm not super anal about everything. I mean, if I'm doing if I know I'm going to do a large yard piece of fabric and I'm going to repeat and and I'm going to cover the whole thing with this, I'm going to make a larger batch of ink. Now, your block will not last long enough without being washed on a whole yard of fabric. So you'll have to stop and wash your block and come back and do it again. I think it's better to start looking at this. This is pretty small that I'm going to print on, and I mix quite a bit of ink. It goes farther than you think, but part of it is just getting used to your comfort zone and how much you're going to print at one time.
So the same lady said if one mixes small amount, how can one get the same color again?
Well, to get the same color every time, pay attention to how you're mixing. Like if you pay attention to what you're doing, you'll start understanding mixing colors. If you really, you can write it down. You could take a picture of it. I just kind of wing it. I know this was violet and white. And then I can most likely get something pretty close to it. So I am rolling out up here, as I was saying, it's called the trough. So this is your trough of ink, and you kind of want it clustered in a chunk like that so that it stays moist. And then what I'm creating down here is your well. The well is where you pull from your roller and put onto your block. And some of the most, I'm going to scoot this way so you can see, Liv. Some of the most important things about your well is that it's not too wet. So I'm going to stop talking for a second, and hopefully if I get down here low enough, my microphone will pick up the sound, because part of a good well for me personally is knowing the sound. So to me, a proper well sounds like the way suede would sound. So let me get it into and it should look, and so right now it's a little dry. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to tap into my trough. If you notice, I put just a tiny bit of ink on there at a time. And then I'm going to spin my roller so it gets nice and even. Okay, so I'm going to scooch down. And can you guys hear that? I'll stop talking for a second. It's a very specific sound, right? Now I'm going to show you what it shouldn't sound like. Sorry there. So a couple of do nots do. Do not stick your roller like this and go like that. Because then, here's the sound of a wet well, extremely wet. And then look at it. Do you see how, if I kind of shimmer it back and forth, how wet, and like it almost looks, my roller has like it's almost like a paintbrush amount on it. Yeah, that's no bueno. So what you want to do is then you just scrape it up. You're like, oh, I got too much ink in my well. So I'm going to do that. All right, so now that because here's the thing, you guys, is the key is if you can start off here with the right consistency and get it on, then you'll get it on your block the correct way, and then you'll get it on here and you'll be happier with the results. So like this is, just that beginning part that if you do this right, you'll have more success here and at the end result. So the first thing you're going to do is we have to prime our block. It's not been used yet. So even after a first washing, the first time I use a block in a printing session, I will do what I call prime the block. So I'm going to ink it up really well. Go in multiple directions. And I'm spinning my roller, as you notice. And also, if you notice, the position that my roller is in. I'm not holding it up like this. It's like it's parallel. So I'm rolling, and it allows me to get a nice, even surface roll across the top. So this has this little thin layer of ink. This is why you have this drop cloth. And I'm just going to give it a little, so there's a little test print. So what I want you to notice is there's this like beautiful thin layer of ink on my block now. So it's like it's primed. And now I have a lot more confidence in getting an even coating of ink and a better print because I have a nice primed block. All right, so I'm going to come in here, I'm going to tap into my well, make sure it's all even. There's a little goober. You just come in, when you get goobers, it's bound to happen. You get little dry pieces of ink. So your well almost also, like, you know what a stamp pad looks like when it had like a fresh stamp pad, not too much ink on it, it's not dried out. It has that really pretty squishy sort of look. My ink well kind of looks like that, okay? And as I roll onto my block starts taking on that same look. So I'm going to come in here. Here we go. So it kind of has that same sort of look of like a stamp pad. So I used thin layers of ink. And the reason you want to do that is if you use a super wet roller or anything, that ink will start sliding down off of your design and into your background, and then you get these gooby blobs, and it's really unattractive. So I'm going to print this one on point because I think it's going to be really fun on point. So this material is super easy to transfer, and when I use this, I usually just use my hand here or my hand here. And I kind of rock it back and forth, making sure I get all my edges. If you do this, you're going to get like these weird little spots of like where your finger pressed on the block. So you want to be a little bit larger surface. Do not, this is another do not, take a roller and go across the top of it, because you know what can happen is your block will skip or it'll move, right? So there's that. Took a little bit too long talking there, and I have a little spot here that didn't get inked as well, or it sat there too long. When you're doing this, you wouldn't talk so much, and so you'd be able to like just kind of get into the rhythm. And now this, a lot of times when I'm doing a large round of printing, sometimes I can do like a 6-hour round of printing. My wrist gets super sore, so I have this, which is called a Baron. This is made by Speedball. I have 2 different types of Barons here. I'm going to show you this one, and then I'll show you how the other one works. So this guy, I'm going to line up. I know my edges line up right there. And you just take and give a little pressure like that. And there you go. Now, obviously, I didn't squish down there very well. But when you have like one of my larger blocks, like the Ganesha, it is really hard with the block on top to make sure you've actually pressed down on all the areas. So I will put the fabric on top of the block, and then I'll use this traditional Baron, which is a banana leaf over a hefty piece of cardboard. This is a Japanese product. And your hand goes like this, and then you rub little circles on top of the fabric, and your block is underneath. And what that does is these little tiny circles will transfer the ink over, but you really don't need that unless it's a big block. All right, let's line this guy up. There we go. We'll see if I can get a little bit better. Ta-da!
Mama, we have a question.
Oh, what's the question, honey?
How far does a tube of ink go in regards to the amount of fabric used?
Oh, gosh. How far does a tube of ink go? Well, okay, so there's a lot of factors in that. First off, so for example, it depends on how much surface of the fabric are you actually covering in ink, and how much space is there, right? Like, so if this guy, you know, I have no idea how to answer that. Tube ink goes quite a ways. I've never studied, or not studied, but I've never kept track of that. I do know that ink goes quite a ways, especially if you are using thin layers of ink and are, being really diligent by not having too much waste and stuff like that.
Someone else asked what brand of ink.
This is called Speed. The brand of ink I use is Speedball Fabric Block Printing Ink. So isn't this fun how it repeats? And it's such a simple block, right? I mean, you guys all saw how easy that was to carve, even with talking. And it's not perfect, but it's our, that's kind of part of it though, is like the more you do, as far as like for me, like the first one block isn't that interesting, but then the more you add, the more interesting it gets. I also believe this is hand printing, hand carving, so it's not supposed to look like it was machine printed. It's supposed to look like I printed it. So the other thing you'll notice when you're doing like a whole bunch of printing, that your well will start just getting kind of tacky and dry, and that's when you just clean it up and make a fresh one. And it's
If you have ink left in the trough at the end of a session, have you tried to save the extra in an airtight container?
Why, yes, I have. If I knew I was going to print the next day, and I had, when I was doing one of my fabric collections, I was mixing colors to match my Pantone chips that then I would send to the fabric company because I really wanted to see what it was going to look like. And that stuff I did save. What I did is I actually had it in my tray and I made it into the like a smallest little ball I could, and I put saran wrap all over my plexiglass. And it was fine the next day. I don't know how long that would last. So yes, you could totally save it in an airtight container.
Is it water-based ink? Sorry.
It is a water-soluble ink in the sense that you can wash it with a little soap and water and it'll come right off. But there, as you can see here, there is some oil in there. That's what, wrong tool. That's what allows it to stay wet enough while we're printing. The other thing that Speedball makes, which is really great, is what's called a transparent extender base. So we live in Central Oregon, and it's dry. And if you're doing a large printing, your ink can start drying out and getting goopy, and then you're not getting nice thin layers of ink. You're getting kind of this dried ink stuff. So I'll add a little extender to it. Also, whenever I use metallic, they make some great metallics, but they are like thicker than snot. They are so thick. And so I've always avoided them. But the other day I was like, I really want some gold. So I was like, well, what if I added a little extender to it, and then it got to the consistency that I like to work with. Some people don't mind working with it directly out of the tube. This becomes a personal preference. So just know everything that I'm giving you is starting off points and places for you to start your own personal experimentation to find what works for you. Because everybody's going to do things differently. I mean, I know lots of different block printers, and they all have their own style and their own way of doing things and their likes and dislikes. So all I can do is hope that I'm adding to your toolbox, and then you take it wherever you can go and take more classes from other printmakers, etc., etc. All that stuff is really good. Okay, I'm going to do one more so we have a complete design, or it's going to look funny. Oh, this is super dry. Okay, this is actually really good so you can see how dry. I don't know if you guys can see on my roller. It's just kind of looks tacky and dry. See that kind of texture on there? It's just kind of So I'm just going to clean it up really quick, especially because I only have one more to do. Now, when you do clean up the dry stuff, don't put it in your trough. Put it off to the side. You can see how different that is. And then sometimes I'll even clean off my roller. So you know what my mom does. Okay, so it's always fun because my mom does printmaking also, and we both have our own things. So when she has her roller full of ink, she doesn't do that like I do. She takes, and she'll have some fabrics laying around that she might end up using, and she just rolls it on there to get a really funky textural background, and then she'll print on that. This is very clever.
Someone said thank you for the class today.
Oh, you're welcome. Is it already noon? Have I gone too long?
No,
Okay. Well, this is the last one, and then... Well, obviously, I really get into this, and I love teaching it. I love getting to print and play and experiment and get other people excited about it. So, okay, last one. There we go. Ta-da! So there we go. That's kind of fun, right? And so what's really cool with something like this is that you can take this and you could embroider on it. You could mix it into a pieced quilt, make a zipper pouch. Those are my favorite. So yeah, this block printing. I love it. If you have any questions at all, always feel free to email me. I am at your disposal because I think everybody should block print. So any other questions from anybody?
So how do you clean it up?
Oh my gosh, how do you clean it up? That is so good. And it's a good thing. Otherwise I would have gone and just done it and not told. Okay, so couple things that I think are really important, and mostly because I like to keep, I want to keep my house going nice and smoothly. I always scrape up as much ink as possible. So, and I put that in the trash. So, again, I'll clean up all of this. Mom would take her roller. Here, I'll do it on here. This is what she would do. And then she would take and print over that. She's so funny. And I never think about it. I don't know why. So anyways, I'll scrape and clean up all this, put this in the trash, and then literally a little bit of Dawn and a little sponge, and this stuff comes off like that. And that's all you need to do. You can dry this off or you just let it dry naturally. Totally up to you. They don't, sometimes, just so you know, like the magenta and the red like to stain the blocks, but it really won't affect any of the printing. So,
One says thank you.
well, you're
So
welcome.
you don't have to wash the block?
I do, yes, ma'am. I wash it with Dawn. I'm just saying that it might stain it. Like right now, it's just the ink on it, which isn't even coming off now, but it comes off great with a little bit of Dawn and water. But what does happen sometimes is that some of these colors will actually stain the pink. So, yeah.
And then that takes how long to dry, you said?
Well, it doesn't, 2 days to set is what Speedball recommends, is 2 days to set, and you don't have to use like a hot steam iron. I love to iron it because there's this whole like, oh, it's so cool process, right? Like, this is my baby. So I like to press my stuff, but it will set in 2 days. And it dries, like if this, I'm going to pass this around, you can touch it. It's just slightly tacky right now. But it will, by the end of today, it'll be dry. So, yeah.
Someone says they like your mom's idea about cleaning the wool off the pattern.
I know, I wish I remembered doing that, but I just don't.
Really looking cloth.
One more question.
One more question, yeah.
Again, what are the best fabrics to use for block printing?
Oh, okay, so you know what? It really depends on what you're looking for. Couple things. This is like, so this material right here, this indigo dyed, was a PFD, like a Pimatex, right? So it's a really nice tight weave. That is going to accept your ink really well, and you're going to get these really beautiful, clean prints. Now, that material there is this Essex, so you're going to get a little bit more of a texture when you use that. I personally think you can print on anything. One of the things actually I was going to print on today and I totally forgot was Craftex. I've also printed on cork, which is really cool. Cork takes a little bit longer to dry, and you definitely don't want to like slip your block on that stuff. But like in this is filled with this. I have velveteen ribbon. I've printed on velveteen. This is a home deck fabric. This is like a double gauze. Here's a twill tape. So it's all going to look differently as part of it, or look different as part of it, but I'll print on anything. Does that answer the question, Liv?
I think so.
Think so? Okay. Cool. Well, thanks you guys for coming. I really appreciate it. Yay. You can press stop.